Well, thank you all for joining us today for our second Graduate Group in Education PhD colloquium talk. We are excited by today's guest, Dr. Casey Mastrop, who will be introduced shortly. My name is Danny C. Martinez. I am Associate Professor in the School of Education in Language, Literacy, and Culture, and Chair of the Graduate Group in Education. I'm just sharing my screen to remind you all that we have a series of talks throughout this quarter. I see Kazan is on now, and she'll be our next speaker the following Monday. So please continue to join us, share this information. Last week, Adam Musser presented, and his presentation will be available shortly online. So I'm going to pass it on over now to Dr. Rebecca Ambrose, who will be introducing Casey Mastrop today.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Danny, and thank you for putting on this GGE speaker series in the spring quarter, where we're recognizing the great dissertation work that our students are doing. We haven't done this before, and I think it's a really nice addition to our spring quarter. And it is my honor to be introducing Dr. Casey Mastrop, who finished her dissertation at the end of last summer. And it was a very exciting project to be a part of because it looked at mathematics secondary credential candidates. And for those of you who may not be aware, we do not have enough math teachers out in high schools. Unfortunately, it's often taken up by people who are not credentialed in that area. And many of the teachers that we do have are teaching in what we would consider an old-fashioned way. And that's very problematic because mathematics ends up being a place that traumatizes people. People feel their life's ambitions are often cut short because they can't get through the mathematics that they need to in order to pursue their dreams. And so it's very problematic. And Casey came to us wanting to make a difference in the world of teacher education after having been a teacher for many years in Woodland and doing some coaching there. And she has realized her dream of getting the PhD, which has been wonderful, and is now working for several different groups, including the CTERN, which is the Center for Teacher Education Research and something network. I forget what our I stands for, but it's a collaboration among the various UCs to improve teacher education, and she is very helpful in that endeavor. And she is also working for, and I forget the title of the project that Steve and Danny and Alexis and others have been involved in, also looking at teacher education. And she eventually would like to be a teacher educator with an associate professor or an assistant professor title. And I'm sure that's going to happen sometime soon when we emerge from COVID. So we're lucky to have Casey here with us now, and look forward to hearing her talk today. Thank you, Casey.
Well, thank you all for having me here. I'm so excited. It's so great to see all the faces. I really appreciate your support and just coming to hear me talk about mathematics and the way that we're thinking about how we're preparing math educators in today's schools. So let me dive in to sharing my screen. I will say that when I go into my shared screen mode, I'm not going to necessarily be able to see if any of you have any questions. So hopefully Danny can help, or Rebecca can kind of help moderate that for me. I'd be really appreciate that. Hopefully you all can see my slide here that says the current trends and or challenges faced by math educators in today's K-12 schools. Yeah. All right, cool. So let's just let's just dive right in. So Wait, what, lying, I'm lying. So today I'm going to invite us to have a conversation first about kind of some of the big challenges that math teachers are going to face as they enter in to their practice in K-12 schools. And so really to begin, I want you to kind of get your mind in thinking about how you are as a learner and doer of mathematics. So take a moment to pause and think back to your K-16 or K-12 experiences with math. So just take that moment to think about that real quick. So I'm not sure what came to your mind. Pop it in the chat. That might be helpful to just share with some people out there. Maybe some of these pictures resonate with what you remember about your K-12 math experiences. Maybe it was full of drill practice. Maybe it was like you were always that first hand and that first voice. Maybe you were never the first voice. Maybe you were always the like kind of the hider of sharing those answers. Maybe you were like always trying to get the same answer as the teacher, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't happening for you. We all have different experiences when we think about how we learn and engage with mathematics. And as Rebecca kind of started talking about, in math classrooms today, there is always, there seems to be a dichotomy of like winners and losers, and this is really problematic. And I'm sure some of you might have experienced those different kind of relationships and roles in your own K-12 math experiences. And so if you were to ask most students today what they think their role in a math classroom is, most of them might tell you it's to get the answer right. I know that's what my daughter would tell me. She'd be like, oh, it's to get that answer right, Mom. It's really not for them to think about the mathematics as a beautiful thing. It's not really a space where they think about engaging in deep connections to kind of to apply concepts to kind of their future goals and dreams. They really think that like the math lesson or the math class is a place where they need to perform, a place where they need to demonstrate their understanding rather than kind of a place where they get to explore and learn. And so this really point that I'm trying to make as we dive into this conversation together today is that we all have different relationships with mathematics. And for individuals who become math educators, these past experiences really dictate the kind of learning environments that they're going to create for their future students. So today I want to talk about some of these current trends that and challenges that are faced by math educators in today's K-12 schools. And I want to do this in two different parts. So the first part, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what these different kind of changes in the K-12 schools are. And then I'm going to talk more broadly kind of about my own work with kind of preparing prospective teachers and their journeys and kind of whether they were primed to meet these challenges or whether they kind of were in a state of little conflict as they entered into the practice. So what are some of, what does teaching math in today's K-12 schools look like? So these are a lot of buzzwords that you probably hear. Oh, it's student-centered. There's a lot of conceptual understanding, differentiation, right? Mathematical processes and mindsets. So what are all these buzzwords? What do they mean, right? So when we think about, I think Deborah Ball says it the best, and actually Joe Bowler also says the same thing. We really want to think about giving students a low floor and a high ceiling approach when we're thinking about teaching mathematics. We're thinking about giving students a variety of ways that they can solve problems that meet them at their level. And so that's where we tap into that kind of differentiated teaching, which is going to also drive it to be student-centered, where teachers are just kind of taking the back seat. They're facilitating. They're not the keepers of all knowledge, right? They're really driving instruction and practice from the student's perspective. I really love this quote here. We really think about teaching math in today's world. We want students to understand and do mathematics. It really involves them generating strategies for solving problems. We want to apply these approaches in a lot of different contexts, and we want to see if they lead to solutions and then check if those solutions make sense. And that is really different than kind of other ways that we used to teach mathematics. So let's talk about some of these shifts with what we hope to see. What do these shifts actually mean? So the fundamental shifts when we think about teaching math today, than even when we think about teaching math when I was in the classroom back starting in 2006, we think about students need to be thinking about what they're doing instead of just solving the equation, instead of just filling in the blank, circling the bubble, or marking the correct box. There's a fundamental shift away from memorization. And NCTM, so the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, really talk about that students need to be able to recognize and apply mathematics in context outside of the math classroom. And I think about that a lot in conversations just with my daughter. We were talking about mixing different ratios of baking soda and vinegar together, and like, what is that going to do to the balloon? And then we were sitting and practicing some fraction work, and there was a big disconnect between that, just that balancing of those different ideas. And so that's a big shift. We want to lead kids to the applying the math to the greater pictures. This shift has really led teachers, students, and parents to really engage with mathematics in ways that they've never been asked before. And that really leads me to kind of this big continually evolving challenge that I'm going to ground my dissertation conversation with you in. So this challenge is that in math teacher education, a big question is how do we prepare prospective teachers and support practicing teachers to teach in ways that they did not experience as learners? So we know mathematics education has shifted. Not all of our candidates that come to us have experienced these shifts as students. So then how do we take up that responsibility and role and help prepare them to kind of facilitate learning that is very foreign to them? Our past experiences play a huge role in the notions and beliefs that we have as individuals about learning and doing. And so today I want to talk about a slice of my dissertation work that focuses on the role of prior experience and how pre-service teachers navigate their prior experiences as they learn new information in the teacher ed program. So with that said, what does prior experience mean? What is the role of it? What do studies say about prospective teachers and how they kind of navigate that space? So prospective teachers, they come to formal teacher prep with different ideas and ways of thinking. And this influenced then what they learn from our courses as we work with them as teacher educators. So during our time, during students' time in teacher prep, they kind of face challenges with balancing kind of that prior experience that maybe some of you thought about at the beginning, or even like this person here in the slide balancing like, well, maybe I learned facts first. Well, now I'm here in my methods class talking to that student about, well, is it fixed versus flex instruction, right? Asking them to really balance these two very different ideas about mathematics learning. And so teachers' current beliefs and working assumptions can really kind of create these rooted notions about what it means to kind of learn and do math. And so what I did in my dissertation was I really thought about a way to kind of create a conceptual framework to kind of get at this question. How do we learn this from pre-service teachers? So I'm kind of going to show you a big diagram here, and I'll walk us through it a little bit. And so this is kind of the root of what we're going to talk about today. It outlines some different key constructs. So you'll see the words identity, you'll see perception of self and others. And so really this is what's guided the data collection and analysis. This was my framework that I used for understanding how mathematical experiences shaped and informed pre-service mathematics teachers' identity over time as they then entered into teacher preparation. So to add a little bit of more clarity behind some of these words in here, so I situate identity work in math ed as kind of really taking the social context into consideration. So one's mathematical identity is manifested in the different constructed worlds they operate in, right? So in our in-school context, we have maybe a different math identity than we do in our out-of-school context. The way that we interact with certain people also impacts our math identity. The way that someone, like your designated identity, the way that someone tells you or sees you, like if a teacher says, oh, you're really good at math, but you may not take that on as your actual identity. So I looked at this very complex navigating kind of moving identities that are constantly changing over the course of from kinder when we start all the way through our college education when we think about our experiences with mathematics. And all of that stays in our candidates and then they come to teacher ed. And so how do we then take all of that experience? How do we think about the social communities in practice and kind of meet them where they are? And so what I did was I drew from narrative methodology. That word's always so hard for me to say. So basically I had people tell me stories. I said, let's sit down and let's have a story. Tell me about some of your mathematical experiences. And so Corey Drake found that these personal narratives can really reveal not only the individual behind the story, but also the importance that the individual places on the story and the experience that happened. And that really kind of informs how they're going to then act on new information they get. So for me as a teacher educator, knowing these stories can help inform me then on the different pedagogical strategies and approaches I might take with different pre-service candidates. So stepping back a little bit and giving you some of the context. So there were 8 candidates that I'll talk about today. They were all recruited from a UC teacher prep program in California. So UC, that's a little redundant. The model of the preparation program, it's an integrated model of coursework. So we're talking about theory and practice mixed together. So they're in a student teaching placement for the whole year. The cohort model is an important thing to mention because these student teachers are together the whole entire time as they move forward through their practice. So they really build a community with each other. And I think that's a really important thing to note because we're talking about social communities and how we're developing our identity within those places of time. And then I think it's also important to know that this was a longitudinal study. So I followed these teachers from the time they entered to the time they ended their first year of in-service. So that was 2 years. But today I'm only talking about a very, very, very small slice of that journey over time. I do see some comments in the chat, but I don't know if those are to me or to others, and we can talk about those also at the end. So let's dive into some of the data. Again, there was a lot of data collected. This was 2 years, 8 people. And so I want you to see the full corpus of data just so you can kind of wrap your head around it. Like what I'm presenting today is like the smallest little sliver. I'm really only going to talk about one of the semi-structured teacher interviews that we had at the start of the year. I'm going to talk about their math autobiography and kind of this response of what is math and how do students learn? Because again, I'm thinking about what are the experiences that they're bringing in to teacher ed. And so the first interview that I had with them, as well as these other 2 course assignments, really kind of set the stage of like, who are these candidates at the start of teacher education? The interview ranged from 30 to 60 minutes. It was just me and a participant sitting there having a conversation about their experiences. And I literally said, tell me a story about mathematics. That was how we started that conversation together. I had some follow-up questions. If I felt like some more prodding needed to happen, like maybe they said, oh, well, I was really good at it. I would ask them, oh, well, why do you think you're really good at it? Tell me more about kind of where that notion came about. Tell me something that was really exciting. Tell me something that was really challenging. So the interview was semi-structured, but really it was about learning their mathematical history and their story. Take a breath right there. And let's move into the next slide. Sorry, my computer froze. There we go. So I want to take a little step back. And I know I started this at the beginning with this question about this evolving challenge, but I want to revisit it before we dive into some of the data and some of the things that I found out by thinking about these mathematical stories. So the 2 questions that I want to address in the next few slides are, well, what were these stories, right? So what are the stories that pre-service math teachers tell when they ask to describe their mathematical journey? So these are 8 candidates. What did they tell me about? And then this other question, which ties back to these current trends and challenges, do these pre-service teachers want to perpetuate this figured world, right? This social space that they participated in as students Do they want to perpetuate the figure world that they experience as learners and doers of math, or do they want to foster something different for their future students? So I'll let those just kind of marinate for a second. So I go back to this notion of storied identities. And so I said I asked them about their mathematical journey, their mathematical history. And so participants began their mathematical history in one of two ways. And I found this to be actually really fascinating. At first, I remember when Rebecca and I were talking about this, I was like, I don't know, did I lead them to this answer? But really it came to when I said, tell me a story about math. They either told me a story that emphasized math ability, or they told me a story that emphasized what they felt was a pivotal moment from their math past, their mathematical journey from the past. And regardless of which of these two stories they shared, when they surfaced their memories that were centered around K-16 math, they identified like a couple few moments that really impacted their understanding of what it meant to be seen by others as good at math. I think that's an important thing to kind of hold on to. For a lot of these stories, again, I will say it just one more time, how are they seen as others as good at math? And so I'm going to show you what that looks like in a figure. So we have the 8 participants here. We have on the left on the column, the vertical column, we kind of have their perception of self as a doer and learner of math, right? So we're thinking about ability. And then we kind of have their timeline on the bottom, right? Primary school, secondary, undergrad, and then the start of pre-service year. And then we have the participant names on the right that associate with their lines. And so how did I place people at high, medium, low, unstated? Well, it was kind of simple. They either said, I'm really good at math. Well, you know, I'm not really sure how I feel, or like, man, I've never been good at math, right? And some of them, as you see, Ophelia never said anything about herself thinking that she was a certain ability at mathematics. The words that she used a lot was, well, I've been told, I guess I'm good at math, but I don't really know, kind of like not subscribing to those notions that were kind of put on her. The X's in the graph really represent different kind of pivotal moments in time that shifted their own perception of themselves as a learner and doer of mathematics. And those are kind of like the juicy parts of the story that we're going to dive into a little bit today about kind of what are these histories that they're bringing in and how might that kind of impact how they're responding to the credential, the credential program. Questions at all? I'll stop and pause for a moment about this. I know it's like a big graph, so. And I can give an example also, like if we think about Lorenzo here, he started real low, he had this big kind of shift right around primary school and way up, way up, way up to high. And so he entered secondary school and his perception increased because his classmates started asking him for help. And that was also associated with him having more strength in his own English speaking. And so he said, oh, well, my teachers were understanding me more. And so my peers understood me more, and kind of getting that affirmation. And so really started to kind of increase in his own perception of himself as a learner. So let's dive into perspective. So when we think about the pre-service teachers in this sample and the moments that they shared during their K-16 experiences, there was really these different identity confirmations and disconnections, right? So there was these different kind of reasons that resulted in these teetering moments, and they all teetered around this bad and this good math ability. And again, I thought this was something that was so fascinating. I never said these words, were you good or bad at math? But it was something that they chose to bring to the table when they talked about their mathematical experiences. So it really made me turn and say, okay, how can we re-examine these notions of how individuals learn, do, and teach mathematics if they're all centering this idea around what it means to be good and bad at math? And so they underwent this shift in perspective about Well, bad at math means that, I don't have the right answer or I'm not being heard, but then all of a sudden now I'm good at math because people are asking me for help. And that kind of perspective was different for each individual based on their different experiences. So let's dive into some of the findings and then we're going to look at some juicy quotes from the participants. So there are a lot of different ways the data was analyzed, and it revealed some similarities between the participants in the sample regarding what moments from their past they elected to share, and how they kind of made some meaning from their experiences. So there are two findings that I'll share. And the first, as some of the pre-service teachers shared their personal histories, many underwent this shift with how they talked about their success and how they talked about their struggles as mathematics learners and doers. So really thinking not so much about deficit language and really just thinking more about a challenge, and viewing it in a different way. The second kind of finding that we see, as the pre-service teachers in this sample shared some moments, they experienced their math identity confirmation and disconnect. So remember how that graph had like your designated identity floating around and your actual identity floating around? So they experienced these moments where there was a lot of kind of disconnect between the way people were seeing them and the way that they felt about their identity in mathematics, right? So these different moments of identity coherence, and that really impacted how they felt as a learner and doer of mathematics. And so I want to go back to this question about what does it mean to be successful at math? And I think that's kind of one of these current trends and challenges that we see arising in our math classrooms today, right? So as we prepare teachers to enter the classroom, this question comes up a lot. Do your students feel successful in their math classrooms? And so these histories revealed really systemic experiences that kind of shaped these individuals' math identities. And there were different catalysts that kind of created some change in perspective, right? So when they saw math presented differently, they started shifting their perspective. When answers were kind of accepted from across the board from all students, again, like we talk about Katie, she talked about when she got into a math classroom, one of her teachers took all the answers and all we would call on all the people. That really changed her perspective about what does it mean to be good at math. You're hearing from multiple voices. And so that means everybody's good at math, right? We're all sharing our answers. And really thinking about embracing change, noticing nuances. These are all different kind of shifts that the teachers talked about in their journeys when they looked at kind of what does it mean to be successful at math. And so when we think about viewing mathematics classrooms as like these little pockets of these little figured worlds, an individual's membership in this world or the exclusion of their membership can really be associated with how they're positioned. And I think that's a really important thing when we're preparing future teachers and responding to some of these challenges of creating differentiation, of creating community in the classroom. How are we positioning students and giving them sense of belonging? And I think that's one of the big things that we can kind of take away from hearing these individuals' stories. So what did they say about what does it mean to be successful? Let's dive a little deeper into that. So I broke them down into some categories as well to just kind of be helpful. We have mathematical success here on the left, and then it kind of moves over into sense of belonging and a product of hard work. And so I'm showing you a little bit of the coding, kind of that back coding that led to some of those bigger findings. We had 4 students at the top talk about really needing to feel like they belonged in the classroom. And so we have Emily and Damien really thinking of their own self-perception as driven by others. So I know I showed you that chart way back in the beginning, but that was that black circle that was kind of cycling inside our K-16 experiences. We have Amanda and Aaron where their sense of belonging was really driven by their self. They felt like they felt how they felt because it was inside. It wasn't impacted as much as by others as for Emily and Damien. We then have the product of hard work. And we have Katie, Ophelia, Mary, and Lorenzo all kind of fell down in that bottom box there. They talked a lot about mistakes resulting in success for them. They also talked a lot about mathematical success to them really meant that they kind of felt this disconnect from others and their own self-perception, right? So I think about like Ophelia kept saying to me, well, I never really felt like I was that good at math. People just always told me I was. So there was also that disconnect. And she's like, I'm only good at it because I work really hard. And so not really seeing it as anything more than just working really hard and being part of that community and process. If we dive a little deeper into some examples, right? So this sense of belonging, so this strong actual identity, this way that you kind of view yourself, right? And so as these stories unfolded, we think about Emily and Damien's opening statements in their stories that they shared. These were actual identity definitions. And so Emily shared, when I was in elementary school, I was incredible at math. According to my teachers, people would always tell me, wow, you're just so good at math. You're just naturally smart. Damien shared something really similar. I was always seen as good at math during K-12. For some reason, teachers were always comparing me to other students when it came to math. No matter what math class I had, I was one of the top students, and it bothered me when I was outperformed by others. It was something I didn't really try so hard in. So these two stories really kind of highlight the words that they use to describe their experiences are kind of what their actual identity is as a mathematic learner and doer. These are kind of constructed, these stories, these words are constructed by the storyteller as factual assertions about who they are and how they were seen, right? I was incredible at math. And it was interesting that Emily then added that according to my math teachers, right? And so like, I was really good at it. And this is the evidence I have, right? And then we also see something really similar with Damien when he talks about, well, it just really bothered me when I was outperformed, even though he kind of tried to take the backseat of like, I was told, but it bothered me when I wasn't the best, right? And we see also then kind of a contrast when we think about the stories that centered around success is the product of hard work. We think about these stories being centered around how the individual is positioned and valued as a learner and doer of math. So this quote's from Lorenzo. When I started school, I can only speak Spanish. By the time I was in second grade, my parents started pulling me out of school to help in the field. That's what they did when they were younger. So they saw the same future for me. From that moment, I struggled with math and every other subject for that matter. I decided I had to make a change. And then he didn't say math textbook, but I got a math textbook and started reading it, sometimes for up to 3 hours a day to learn the math and slowly moving from one problem to the next. This occurred all the way up to high school. And so Lorenzo's story is particularly really interesting. Really how he was positioned and valued as a learner, and then kind of where he felt he fit in the grand scheme of kind of learning and doing mathematics. Lorenzo and I dove a lot more into conversations about his experiences in mathematics. But really, you know, a lot of what he talked about was his own perseverance and pushing through to kind of gain that success and that acceptance in the classroom. So there's a few more things I want to talk about. The last thing, there's only 3 more slides here. So are these teachers, based on these stories they shared at the start of the program, do we have a sense if they're already primed for reform? Or do we have a sense if they're in a little bit of a state of conflict? Do they want to perpetuate some of the figure worlds of their past? Or do they envision something different for their future practice? And I think that's a really important question to think about and consider as we see as we see the students move through. So I'll give you a little slice of kind of where they ended the year. So I just shared with you kind of their beginning stories, and now I'm going to like fast forward, skipping all the data analysis, skipping all that part, and just share you a little sample of kind of how they ended the year. So at the end of the year, we have Erin, Amanda, and Lorenzo, and they really kind of left teacher ed in a little bit of a state of conflict about their practice. And this came from their first interview when I said, share your future vision. And then at the end of that year, I asked them about their future vision again, and we looked at some changes and comparisons between their initial start and their second vision they shared. Erin has really ambitious goals that are really in conflict with his own K-16 math experience. He talked a lot about wanting to create these really holistic kind of environments for students to kind of share their voice, but he doesn't have a lot of experience in those areas with those practices. Amanda really tried to desire to find a balance between developing the whole student and academic success, and she's likely to adopt practices based on the needs of her students. So if she's in a classroom that students really want, just give me the notes, give me the answers, she's likely to adopt those type of practices rather than think about other types of ways to situate student learning and voice in the classroom. Lorenzo really kind of experienced a lot of didactic traditional instructional practice, but he found a lot of value in these lecture-based practices as a student, but he really expressed a lot of need for change. So every time we talked about teaching, we always talked about wanting to do it differently and always talked about wanting to pull in different strategies. So really kind of feeling in a little bit of a state of conflict about kind of what he sees for his future as a teacher. And then we have the last kind of candidates, and you'll see that Lorenzo makes another appearance on this Prime for Reformed. Because I do think that they all at some point share a really rooted desire to design and implement activities and lessons that are real and relevant to the lives of their students. They really want to foster these learning communities, and they really want to think that relationships are at the heart of their practice. So really thinking back to that challenge at the very, very beginning, if we're asking students to kind of to make mistakes and to learn conceptually, we have to have a community. We have to build relationships. So a lot of the participants said very, very clearly and directly, relationships are going to be at the heart of my future practice. Implications from the study so far, really thinking about for teacher prep programs to really think about how to support teacher candidates, identify the candidates that need that different support in adopting practices and notions about math that are in contradiction with their own experiences, right? So one thing that was really great is all of these student teachers wrote an autobiography, right? Really sharing kind of what their experiences were, which is really helpful in determining how we can help support them through the program and how we can help them negotiate some ways that might be different from what they experienced. Mathematical histories really reveal some really systemic experiences that have really shaped and rooted the mathematical identity each of our pre-service teachers carry into the program. And I think that's really far reaching and can apply to other content areas as well, not just math alone in isolation. I've talked for a while. I'd love to open up a dialogue with y'all. I can keep talking about future work and moving it forward. But you know, it was really kind of fun to kind of share and revisit this work. I think in any of these cases, it's hard to really predict how many of the aspects that were shared by these participants regarding their future practice will come to fruition. But I think that we still can kind of find this space of hearing people's stories and how they learned as students for our future teachers is really important to help inform us as teacher educators with how to support them in kind of teaching the next generation and what different areas and supports they might need. So thank you all for being here and listening. I'm happy to answer questions and just have a dialogue with you all about it. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Casey, Dr. Mastrup, for your presentation. Please, we open up the floor now for anyone. If you have a question, please unmute or let me know you have a question and I'll put you on a list for so that you know when you are up. Go ahead, Steve.
Did you say go ahead, Steve?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, it really struck me how deep these identity pieces are related to mathematics. And you set the stage for that at the beginning, but as I was doing my own sort of personal journey, I mean, I really saw so many of my things mapping onto those ways that the pre-service teachers were talking about that. And I like how you made that comment toward the end about other subject areas, because science also is one for me. But what I'm wondering about is, did you see movement over time with them? I think you said you followed them from entry to the program, and then as they worked toward their master's degree, that kind of thing. I think you didn't talk about that in this talk explicitly, but I'm just wondering, you know, just a couple of ideas about what you saw over time, impacts of program and experience of student teaching, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that you're asking a really good question, Steve, about thinking about the longevity of our students, right? Because we have them when they're in the program with us, and we can really kind of build these ideas and help them try to balance the different notions that they're carrying. And then when they leave and they go into their practice. So what I did see, when I think about Aaron, when I said Aaron is in that kind of that state of conflict, he entered in a school system that said, here's a pacing guide, here's what you need to do, follow these rules and norms. And he kind of resulted back to his own experiences as kind of the firsthand, they're the ones that we're going to call on, really kind of reverted back to some of those experiences that he had as a student, and kind of moving away from some of the ways that we kind of hope and envision that we would see unfolding in math classrooms. When we see other students like Lorenzo, I think about him, and he actually went back to teach at his own high school that he went to as a student. And so he talked a lot about kind of the relationship piece there, and like going back to his own home, like his own, like he, where he grew up and working with his former teachers, and thinking about what are the teachers doing at the site. And like, as he comes in, and I think that the point I'm trying to make is, as Aaron and Lorenzo went into their sites were supportive of either one philosophy or another. And is that philosophy in connection with what the teacher ed program promoted or didn't promote? And then does that help keep that teacher kind of in line with their goals of practice, right? I think about Ophelia. She was really primed for reform, and she went to a school that was really centered on reform and had a lot of support in that area. So she just kept growing and kind of flourishing. And so I think you raise a good question about how do we help kind of continue this momentum on with our candidates as they kind of like leave and go out there. What supports do they kind of have? Are they going to fall back to kind of some old ways, or are they going to continue to push and make their practice problematic, which I think is really a challenge. I don't know if that really answers your question fully, but yeah. And I see some questions. I see Lisa's hands up, and I also see a question that was put in by Gloria. So I'll let Danny be the moderator.
Yeah, I'll have we'll go to Lisa, then we'll go to Gloria's question.
Thank you. All right. So Casey, I'm wondering, based on what you learned, if you have a recommendation for teacher educators to really be more explicit, perhaps with our candidates, about examining these learner identities that they bring into the program. And I know we do, we have them reflect a lot, but I don't know how explicit we should be about this. You as a learner have gone through your education, and you're bringing all of that to the table. So just curious what you think of that.
No, I the more and more I've been thinking about the power of like video in teacher practice, I think is a real juicy, sweet spot for us to kind of push that space of reflection with teachers. And so one benefit of having one of the participants is I was also the university supervisor. And so I was able to be in their classroom all the time, and like we would film practice and watch practice. And so I think that's really an interesting space that you can start pushing that envelope of like our past experience, planning a strategic lesson, teaching that strategic lesson that be like, okay, well, you've never experienced presenting one idea in like 4 different ways. Let's try that. Let's film it. So let's plan for it. Let's film it. Now let's reflect upon like how that went. Or, maybe someone's expressing in a reflection, I'm having a really hard time getting, all my students' voices heard. Well, that's a really juicy spot for us to say, well, let's plan for a strategy. Let's film that lesson. Let's sit down and watch it and like reflect about how we're kind of negotiating that challenge in our practice. I think that's a really rich space to make some really good growth, because it kind of removes the person who's like teaching, and it puts the teacher really back in the driver's seat. Like we want them to be in their, what they're learning. It puts them in seeing kind of what's happening in their classroom. So I think that's a really productive space. And it's something that I think I really want to kind of dive into a little bit more and see kind of where that goes. And I see the question from Gloria. Yeah, so they did, Gloria, about the question about sharing their learning outside of school. I think Ophelia talked a lot about her mom. And talked a lot about her mom actually getting her and her sister. That was the first story she shared. She said, oh, my first memory of math is sitting in my front yard playing like flashcards with my sister. and my mom telling us we had to like practice our flashcard practice together. And so she really talked a lot about kind of that drill, but that's not how she taught. And that's not how she believed that students should learn. And so I think that that's really interesting that she really kind of was this really interesting kind of candidate, and kind of her story I thought was really rich.
Thank you and congratulations.
Thanks.
There's another question from Caroline, and I think there's folks.
You know, I think that, Carolyn, you're asking a really, I think that's a real hard question. And it's something that I know Rebecca and I talked about this before, and I've talked about this with other math educators also. When we enter into like a new system, a new world of teachers, right? As a new teacher, and we come in and we're the new one on site, we don't know a lot of kind of like the dichotomies and the social constructs that are happening. How do we take these ideas of change and reform to math departments that those might not be there? I don't think there's any one right answer. I think there's a lot of different ways to kind of navigate that space. And I think one important thing is like finding your people. And even if that means your people are at potentially like a different school and being like, hey, I want to try this. These are my ideas. You know, let me try to roll it out. And you just try to roll it out in an honest, open way to the department. And you really try to think about, this is what I'm going to do in my classroom. Hey, should we try to teach this together? And then like, use data to drive our discussion about like kind of what happened in our classroom together. I think about that a lot with kind of comparing different instructional strategies. That tends to be kind of like, I don't know, a safe space, but I think you pose a really good question that sometimes it's a path that's lonely to kind of go along and thinking about the climate and the culture that you're at with your school and the ways that you want to teach. I don't think it's always as easy as everyone's going to be on board. And so finding the support, I think, especially for new teachers, it's a question that comes up a lot for me. How do we not lose them in those first few years? So I don't really have a good answer for you. Just have thoughts.
And the final question from Liam on the chat.
Yeah, you know, Liam, you and I have talked about this. So I feel like you're giving me like a little plug here with that conversations we've had. I think about the teachers that I'm working with even now that are finishing up their year in the program, and next year they're getting jobs. As they transition back into face-to-face teaching, there's so much, I call it like the heat of teaching, that you don't feel when you're online. And so they're going to be in the classroom, and that heat of teaching that they're going to feel, those moments that like are removed because you're looking at a screen. How are these experiences that they've had going to impact the way that they respond? Because they didn't get to experience that heat in their pre-service year. They didn't get to navigate that experience and then reflect with other peers about like different ways to respond. And so I'm really hoping that schools and some systems can really respond to support new teachers through this process. I think it's something that I tell the candidates when they go to interviews, like find a way to ask that question. How are you going to be supporting your new teachers that are coming from remote teaching? Like find a way to ask that question to the school you're going to. How are they going to support you in experiencing that in that space? But yeah, it's a good question.
So I want to thank Casey for presenting your work to us today. And I want to thank you all for joining us for our colloquium series. I want to invite you again in 2 weeks, May 10th, for Cal Zong's, we'll be presenting, I see Cal Zong here, we'll be presenting her talk very soon to us. So again, thank you very much. I appreciate you all and have a great day and week.
Well, and it's